All right, well, here's the thing: when you have a deficit and you have debt, it kind of can rein in whatever you're looking to do via either more spending or more tax cutting. And Republicans, through President-elect Donald Trump, were looking to do a little bit of both. Donald Trump was very big on infrastructure spending, maybe to the tune of $1 trillion. A lot of that, he said, would be financed by sort of a tax holiday for corporations holding money abroad. The details were kind of sketchy. But he was also looking for across-the-board tax cuts as well. That seems to have been sort of watered down of late amid talk that everything and anything that they're banding about has to be kind of revenue neutral. You keep hearing that expression, first advanced by Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, who will have much to say about that. And then you have the added issue of Rand Paul saying that while he wants to junk Obamacare, he doesn't like the budget resolution means by which Republicans are entertaining doing just that. So he's against it because he says it will add to the deficit and the debt. Conservative commentator Gina Loudon, liberal commentator Danielle McLaughlin, Fox Business Network's Jerry Willis. Jerry, there could be problems in Geo Paris. Get it? Geo Paris. Take it.
Okay. I agree, though. I think, look, this coalition of the conservatives, of the Republicans, very, very fragile. Not only do you have the senators saying, you know, look, I'm not going to support this, but you also have Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, two senators, saying, hey, look, we don't really like the way this is being done. We can walk away at any time. So you've got to realize that the people standing behind the president-elect, it's a coalition of the unwilling in many cases, and it's going to be hard to keep them together.
Gina, it is a box that Republicans find themselves in. The argument had been that they subscribe to something called dynamic accounting. Without getting too caught in the weeds here, as you know, it's the idea that tax cuts in particular bring you some, you know, boom for the buck down the road. It's just short term, they can make deficits worse. Longer term, though, the oomph you get from extra spending and the like more than offsets that. But that does not appear, for the time being, to be winning the day. What do you make of that?
Well, it's nice to hear a little bit of restraint, right? I mean, when's the last time we heard our bureaucrats, Neil, even discussing the concept of anything regarding restraint with our money? Let's not forget this is our money. They seem to forget that regularly. I'm not lying to you when I say that when you sent me this topic, I had to read it several times to understand what the problem is, that we're thinking before we're just spending, that we're trying to think of ways to make things revenue neutral and to make things to where they're not.
Do you apply that, though, Gina, to tax cuts as well? Do you put that in the same camp as spending?
No, not at all. Not at all. And it isn't in the same camp as spending. And I really think that people need to look at the real numbers and maybe learn to do a little bit of economics here and understand how our federal bureaucracy is used to functioning and that they're a little tone deaf on these issues. It's the American people spoke in November.
Danielle, what do you think here? Because if you subscribe to the view the deficits are getting worse just by sheer size and doing nothing, they will get worse, and the debt will get bigger, then Republicans have already locked themselves into a corner, right?
They're facing a problem that I think is probably unprecedented. You know, in Trump's speech in Gettysburg, you know, his first 100 days, he set out pretty forcefully that he would work on infrastructure, which is going to cost $1 trillion. He would work on tax cuts, which is obviously going to reduce the incoming money into the government fisc. And then lastly, the repeal of Obamacare. The devil is in the details, and what we're seeing is there's a real cost associated not only with the obvious ones, which is tax cuts and infrastructure, but the repeal of Obamacare, in fact.
Well, I don't agree with that, I got to tell you.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Because, look, Obamacare would drive the deficit on its own. It would drive spending. It would drive debt because it's so expensive. And the more people that we're subsidizing, the more federal dollars that are going out. And do you think, how many times do you think the federal government underestimates how much they're spending for something? It never happens. So the idea that Obamacare is pushing us into debt, to me, is you know, really what is happening here, and to take it away is not going to be the problem at all. So I was confounded by his statement. Look, this budget plan that they're putting forward, you know, it's a blueprint only. Nobody is bound by this plan. Nobody has to stick with it. So I think there's a little showboating going on early in the administration.
But I think what's also happening, though, the markets, there are other reasons for it. I want to stress that the markets are confused. Now, These are markets that got way ahead of themselves. I'd be the first to say that after the Trump election, and maybe reality is hitting here that it's, it's tough to make this stuff happen, right? Go ahead, Gina.
But Neil, real quickly, if I can just add to this, we've got to get over this idea somehow that tax cuts cost money. Tax cuts don't cost money, right? I mean, you just listen to that.
Well, they do short term, Gina. I agree with you that they do kind of raise revenue down the road, but initially, they will make a deficit worse.
Make a deficit worse, though, is different than costing money. And I think that a lot of times the Democrats and the big spenders want to put forth an idea that somehow tax cuts cost money, when in fact they don't. And I think if you look at what Donald Trump said he was going to do in the first 100 days, I think the number one concern we know from the Politico survey that came out yesterday, number one concern on everybody's mind is jobs, jobs, jobs. He's already created so many more jobs than any other president. It's unprecedented. That's where the concern is, and that's what he's focused on.
Danielle, it is a little weird, though, for a lot of Democrats all of a sudden have found deficit and debt religion, right? I mean,
well, I mean, we can talk about this in a historic context. And there's another point I want to make about the fact that Obamacare has, in fact, created jobs and has helped poor people across the country. And it's not just jobs in hospitals or healthcare or for doctors' offices. It's in construction and many other things. And actually, there was a report out of Michigan in the last couple of days that talked about 30,000 jobs because of the expansion in Medicare in that state. But more broadly, if you go back to the Reagan years, that was when we really started to see deficits increasing, and certainly the national debt. Reagan tripled the national debt through a lot of federal spending, Star Wars and other defense spending, of course. But this is
the irony was, though, Danielle, that you're quite right. Republicans took all that money coming into Washington and spent it. But the fact is that revenue was coming into Washington because of those tax cuts.
No, absolutely. My point is just more broadly that we have seen this sort of exponential increase starting in the 80s through Republican and Democratic
But if we can
presidents.
get some real economic growth here, wouldn't that be a great thing?
Absolutely,
wouldn't that be a terrific thing? And I think this idea that we are going to support business instead of bashing it. We're going to be positive for people out there who want to make a success of themselves by themselves. That's really the way to go.
Well, there's plenty of small businesses out there who depend on these markets that have been created. I know people who have said, children with pre-existing conditions, other things, small businesses doing their best and, living that great American dream, who have really benefited from many of the things that Obamacare has done.
We're a long way from done. I mean, this new Congress has just started. So some stumbles, we'll keep track of it all. Ladies, I want to thank you all. Meanwhile, Blake Berman has more details.